The creation of the International Space Station served as a symbol of the establishment of relations between the Soviet Union and the United States of America following the end of the Cold War. This unique scientific research center, located in Earth's orbit, has become a facility for solving tasks in the most extensive areas, from medicine to the technology of producing new substances and materials. Moreover, astronauts from different countries, regardless of the relations between their states on Earth, coexist on board. People are delivered to the ISS via the Soyuz space shuttle. One day, biologist Kira and engineer Christian are sent to the station, where 4 cosmonauts are already present. As Soyuz enters orbit, the Flight Control Center congratulates the pair, who are eagerly awaiting docking, joking about the Russian tradition of knocking on the door 3 times before opening it. Finally, the newcomers are greeted by their new teammates, American Gordon and Russian cosmonauts Nika, and brothers Nikolai and Alexei. Kira is amazed by the weightlessness and has to adjust to this new way of existence. Despite the language barrier and cultural differences, Americans and Russians get along well. Nika teaches Kira new Russian words commonly exchanged on the station. Then the woman is settled into her section. Gordon shows ways to get comfortable for the night. Personally, he sleeps in a bag, but some prefer a free flight. The woman immediately gets to work, placing the mice she brought with her into cages. Alexei helps her and explains that they also had many mice, but they cannot live in space as there's nothing for them to hold on to. In the evening, the astronauts have a festive dinner where each shares stories about their place of birth and they sing popular songs together. The only rule on the station is not to talk about politics. The newcomers distribute gifts from loved ones and souvenirs brought from Earth. Then Kira looks at Earth from the space station for the first time, and her colleagues explain the main effect of the view. From here, borders are invisible, and all of humanity is united and indivisible. Later, Nika helps Kira get ready for the night, as the first night is the hardest. But in the morning, the woman wakes up in excellent spirits, which is spoiled when she sees the mice in poor condition. Distraught, Kira looks at Earth and suddenly notices numerous flashes in the United States. She calls the others, and people realize that a nuclear war has started on the planet. Gordon orders everyone to immediately leave the dome and closes the shutters. Communication on board the station is interrupted, but everything works in normal mode. Then Gordon receives a written message from Houston stating that an act of aggression has occurred between Russia and America, and he must take control of the station by any means necessary. Later, he discusses this message with Kira and Christian, who suspect that the Russians received a similar order from their government. Nevertheless, people decide to wait at least a day before taking any action. But then, Nika reports a problem with the thrust. It turns out that the station is in too low an orbit and could fall to the Earth's surface unless the center makes system adjustments. The first tension among the astronauts begins to arise, as each thinks of their family left below. Nikolai informs the crew that the radio may not work because the antenna outside the station is broken, and it can only be fixed manually. Gordon goes out into space. Nika helps him put on his spacesuit and kisses the man goodbye, making it clear that their relationship is more than just professional. Once in open space, Gordon sees Earth engulfed in flames and asks Kira not to let anyone near the windows. Then he begins his work. To distract her colleague from negative thoughts, Kira asks Gordon about his relationship with Nika. He admits that he met her here, in space, and changes the topic to Kira's personal life. She shares that she spent 7 years studying organ replacement but faced failure, though everything might work out in zero gravity. Meanwhile, Alexei listens to their conversation and then cuts the wire. While Christian tries to find the reason for the loss of communication, the Russian cosmonaut replaces the damaged wire with another piece that looks intact, so the American finds nothing wrong. Gordon, meanwhile, approaches the antenna, for which he has to unhook the overly short safety tether. He realizes that the antenna is fine, then a mechanical arm starts moving, threatening the astronaut's safety. It turns out to be Nikolai's doing, without the knowledge of Alexei and Nika. Gordon tries to call out to Kira, but the mechanical arm knocks him off the station's surface and throws him into open space. Nika and Kira try to see the astronaut through the windows, then put on spacesuits and rush to the airlock, but upon extending the rescue rope, they find no astronaut at its end. Kira wants to go out and look for Gordon, but Christian asks her not to leave him alone with the Russians. They, in turn, confess to Nika that on the day communication was lost, they also received orders to eliminate the Americans by any means necessary. Alexei apologizes, not thinking his brother would do such a thing to Gordon, but the latter reminds him that he has no doubt the Americans would have done the same to them. Nika pleads with Alexei to save Gordon and threatens to tell everything to the Americans. She cries out of powerlessness, while Kira and Christian conclude that the Russians attacked first and Gordon is no more. Furious at her comrade's treachery, Nika goes to Kira and asks for her help. She is willing to give Kira her key in exchange for the key to the American locker. While she distracts her colleagues, Kira must sneak into the laboratory, open Locker 0, take out samples of radiation sickness medicine developed by Alexei in orbit, get into the Soyuz, and return to Earth. Because only by having the medicines can the survivors of the nuclear war be saved. Initially hesitant, Kira is persuaded by the argument that only the state with the medicines can dictate terms to the defeated and agrees, exchanging her key for Nika's. Nika sneaks to the location of the oxygen tubes junction, where she is caught by Nikolai and Alexei. They realize that the woman is ready to blow up the entire station just to avenge her lover's death. Nikolai tries to persuade her to abandon the idea, while Kira rushes to the laboratory. She can't find the Zero locker when Christian admits that there isn't one. Kira realizes that Nika deceived them, and they go to confront the Russians about their plans. Meanwhile, Alexei tries to persuade Nika not to blow up the station, but she behaves aggressively. Christian, sneaking up behind her, hits her on the head with a cylinder, but, miscalculating his strength, kills her. As the Russians come to terms with this, Christian and Kira decide to hide, hoping for communication to be restored. The man is devastated, as he only wanted to neutralize Nika, not kill her, and cries from the guilt. The brothers discuss the situation, and Nikolai asks Alexei to help him kill the Americans. He reminds him of their duty to their country and people, but Alexei refuses to participate in murder. He mourns for Nika while Nikolai, taking a screwdriver, goes in search of the pair. Later, Alexei, looking out of the porthole, suddenly sees Gordon, clinging to the side of the ISS. The Russian cosmonaut uses the mechanical arm to help Gordon return to the station, while Nikolai unsuccessfully searches for Kira. He tries to deceive the Americans, saying that Nika is alive. They need to gather together and think about what to do next, but instead of Kira and Christian, Gordon appears, armed with a drill. His friends, shocked by his resurrection, appear. The American demands to know what happened to Nika, and Alexei has to inform him of her death. Enraged, Gordon locks all his colleagues in the compartment and attacks Nikolai with the drill. The men fight until Alexei tries to open the door. Nikolai takes the drill from Gordon and wounds him, while Gordon pulls out Nikolai's screwdriver and in turn strikes his opponent in the neck. The astronauts who open the compartment find only 2 dead bodies, floating in zero gravity, embraced. The survivors arrange the bodies according to protocol and retreat to their sections, trying to make sense of what happened while the station orbits over the burning Earth. Later, Kira goes to the laboratory, examines the room, and finally finds the Zero module. This means Nika did not lie. She rushes to Christian and in his sleep capsule finds the Soyuz spacesuit and Russian research. It seems Christian was preparing to return to Earth alone. Meanwhile, Christian sabotages the station's life support system and tries to frame Kira, telling Alexei about Nika's plan to make the American woman take his research and escape. He accuses Kira of selfish motives when Alexei notices malfunctions. He observes a strange tension between Kira and Christian because of a knife the astronaut is using to make a sandwich. But Christian suddenly smiles and asks the Russian cosmonaut to leave them alone for a while. Alexei floats to the door, but Kira suddenly speaks a phrase about mutual support that Nika taught her. Alexei turns around. Then Christian confesses he disabled the life support system, grabs a knife, and attacks Kira and Alexei. A fight ensues. While Alexei blocks the knife with his hand, Kira strangles their colleague. Nevertheless, Alexei receives a knife wound to the hand. Kira provides him with first aid, and later they together restore the life support system. In the laboratory, Kira notices a net installed in the mouse cage, which kept the animals alive, realizing Alexei did this. Suddenly, the communication system turns on, normalizing the station's orbit, and the threat of falling is averted. Messages from their leadership arrive on the astronauts' computers, asking them to confirm that they have completed their missions to take control of the station. However, instead of responding or following government orders, Alexei and Kira take the research results, board the Soyuz, and fall to Earth in an uncontrolled freefall. Lastly, Alexei asks where they will fly to which Kira finds no answer. This is where the movie ends. In the future, an unknown organization locks millions of people in bunkers where they are forced to become bloggers and conduct endless streams to get everything they need to survive. Why us? Who were we before all this? A young man wakes up in the middle of a gloomy room, not understanding where he is and how he got there. At first, he examines the walls, hoping to find a way out, but there is none. Then the guy notices a turned-on monitor on which one word is written: share. He tries to enter different concepts related to the word exit, but the computer deems them incorrect and again offers to share. The guy confirms this command and the broadcast immediately turns on. The guy tries to ask questions as he can't stay here long. He has a dog at home that needs to be fed and walked, and besides, he wants to drink, but there's no water. He tries to ask this question to the computer and then an option buy appears, but the prisoner has no money and doesn't understand how he can buy water. Soon the guy realizes that real people are watching his broadcasts, but so far he does not quite understand what he can show the viewers, so he starts to grimace but falls and groans in pain, asking for help. The number of views sharply increases and viewers start sending donations of unknown currency with which any purchase can be made, but so far he only has enough for a bowl of dog food which appears in an opening niche on the wall. He expresses his indignation and tries to return the bowl, but there is no such function. And then the guy starts eating, occasionally making dog barks. This brings a new wave of views and donations, and the guy allows himself to buy clothes. However, they turn out to be women's. At night, he cries in despair and misunderstanding of the situation, but pulling himself together, he starts a new broadcast, during which he dances, tumbles, and entertains the viewers in every way possible. Soon, he acquires a t-shirt and an inflatable mattress. After some time, he already has a full wardrobe and shaving tools. Days go by, and the man allows himself a good meal and even alcohol, after which he tries to smash the monitor, but all he achieves is that the broadcasts stop. The guy tries in every possible way to beg forgiveness from the computer, and not getting an answer, again demands to be released from there. And then he just cries, begging for one more chance, and when the degree of despair reaches its limit, the guy lies down on the floor to wait for the end. The monitor turns on. On the screen appears the same room in which a man is. He greets the guy and explains that there are glitches in the system, but in general, upon reaching a certain level, he gained access to the common network. And now he can communicate with others like him, bloggers. The man believes that they all work for the unknown kidnappers who locked them in the bunker. The man talks to the guy all evening about the structure of his new world. He is very verbose and often jumps to other topics, so the guy even gets tired of him. But one day he hears the man cough. He tries to contact him, and dialing his channel number, he comes across a cook teaching the audience to cook. The guy starts dialing different numbers, and it turns out that behind each number is someone's channel. The trapped people teach viewers how to feed cats, apply makeup, and take care of themselves. One of these girls, an athlete, captivates the guy's attention for a long time. Eventually, he connects with a man who is broadcasting about near-death experiences that day. Meanwhile, the young man continues his acrobatic etudes, for which he receives small donations. After one such unsuccessful somersault, he lies on his mattress, and the adult man asks him to buy food, as his time is worth money. After the young man fulfills his request, the man draws attention to their numbers. The young man is under number 14, while the man is 6395873. Does the young man really think he appeared here before him? Everyone in the network is trying to figure out who locked them up here. There are theories about aliens and space, and one boy convinced everyone that they are asleep and undergoing a test. But the man believes that bloggers have locked themselves in their own world. He himself was once married to a star who the young man also liked. They reminisce about her songs and sing them as a duet. At night, the young man again connects to the channel of the girl who does yoga, and after admiring her, sends her a donation. In the morning, the young man buys furniture for himself and again talks to the man, who continues to enlighten him. You can't stay at one level here, because then the viewers will stop loving you and won't pay. So, you need to grow and spread your content. The young man begins to try himself in new genres. He tests stand-up comedy, physical exercises, cooking, singing, and magic tricks. And all this brings a new audience and more donations. At night, he now does gymnastics with the girl he likes, and then he buys medicine for the man. But trying to make the purchase, he makes some mistake and ends up in the room of a woman who is showering at that moment. She is outraged by such a bold intrusion and considers him a kidnapper. The young man struggles to explain that he is also a prisoner. She suggests setting rules, and the man joins their conversation. The woman asks him about the time he has spent in the bunker and hopes that someone tried to escape. The young man remembers how he hit the monitor, and this clearly did not please their owners. The woman thinks that they need to analyze these cases and find a vulnerability in the system. The young man says something about escape and is immediately deducted donations, indicating the existence of security. The woman does not understand the purpose of what is happening. If they wanted to punish them, they would just lock them somewhere and leave them to die without food and water. But they are fed and even provided with comfort. Apparently, the key question is, why them? Who were they before all this? But the young man admits that he wasn't someone important, but here he got the opportunity to live much better. Soon he invents a small show with socks and entertains the viewers with mini performances, which pleases the man and increases donations. One day he gifts the woman a shower curtain, which angers her because she is used to being independent. In the following days, the young man begins to teach people to draw, but since he himself can't draw, the lessons are humorous, and he himself poses as a model. The viewers like this, and the young man buys furniture for his room with the donations. One day, the woman can't stand it anymore and suggests starting a revolution, calling for an uprising of everyone else. A scandal breaks out among the trio, as the man is convinced that it is here that they got the opportunity to live better than before. That night, the man becomes ill. His cough chokes him, and suddenly he has a seizure, as a result of which his face presses against the monitor because he cannot move. The young man appeals to all subscribers for help. Maybe someone knows what to do in such a case. At this time, the woman tries to find a menu in the computer, but she accidentally presses some button, and suddenly the man's room starts burning, and he burns in front of his friend's eyes, unable to help himself. This causes despair and tears, and for a while, the pair do not communicate. But one night, the young man contacts her, trying to convince her that she is not to blame for what happened. He performs a show for her. Suddenly, she confesses that she wants to get drunk. They order alcohol for themselves and remember the last moment of freedom. Neither of them remembers how they ended up in the bunker. Then people dance in their cells. Later, they remember the old man, and the young man says that he still hears his voice. Suddenly, he admits that she was right, and maybe there are others who can replicate her action. Find a function visible only to them. If they all act together, maybe they can break free. The young man goes live and tells the audience about what happened. He points out oddities in the system where unknown functions sometimes appear, and if they can use these functions to hack, maybe the bunker will open? Suddenly, the athlete joins the conversation, who likes her current state because she decides how to spend her day. And right now, she will take care of herself, so she says goodbye to her new friends. The young man and the woman start reviewing all the strange things that the surrounding bloggers send, and some warmly support the pair. Later, he contacts the athlete again, and she reveals his secret to success. He makes people smile, which is very valuable. Misfortune exists everywhere, but so does happiness, so it's a person's own choice. She encourages him to breathe with her when the woman joins in. She analyzed the unknown functions sent to her. Someone can control the ventilation, and someone can even move the walls. She thinks these are different rooms located at different distances. Therefore, a map of connections needs to be built to break them. Although some do not want to destroy this world, the young man asks not to rush things. Suddenly, the woman takes scissors and cuts her hair, explaining it as a distraction for the bunker creators. If they don't react to their dangerous conversation, then they can be distracted by some actions. Later, the young man starts dealing all the numbers in a row and finds a novice like he once was. And at night, he joins the athlete, who calls on everyone to be happy here and now and not try to destroy reality. A dispute starts between the women, where the athlete accuses the woman of violence against others, and she expresses the thought that the athlete is their kidnapper. The young man fears that if nothing works out, he will be left without an audience, and what will he do then? But later, he still goes live, and asks to show how many people are with him now. The number of votes rises to several million, causing his delight. The athlete is outraged. The young man surpassed her in channel reputation and demands to stop all this. A real conflict starts between the women. The athlete demands that others stop influencing the system while the woman asks to increase their efforts. And suddenly, the woman's room ignites and a downpour falls on her rival's room. The young man watches as both of his friends perish and can do nothing. He cries when a door opens behind him to a bright sunny day. Not believing his eyes, he approaches the threshold, but then his monitor comes to life and the young man begins to doubt. He returns to the screen and shouts into it that they managed to do it. There is nothing that cannot be done together. But while he rejoices, the door closes. Thinking, he starts playing his role again, while the number of votes and donations on his monitor rapidly increases. Through the characters, one can observe the stages of a person's immersion in online existence when a gadget becomes a mediator between the personality and others. It can be said that this is a story of life, with many good intentions and talents, but trivially spent on the pursuit of likes. Krefeld, 1984. One night, a father awakens his 6-year-old son Mark because they need to flee their now dangerous home. While the man hurries the older son, Thomas, Mark sees a frog statuette that stood on the shelf come to life. The father and sons drive into the night. Suddenly, the boy's mother Petra appears, begging the father not to take the sons as no one is pursuing him. He drives around her and races to the cemetery. 10 years pass. Mark works at the living sound store he opened with his brother and attends school, where he has a bad reputation as his brother was once expelled for aggressive behavior. Besides the boys, a lame kid named Memo works in the store, whom Thomas values for his loyalty. On his younger brother's birthday, Thomas gives him the Chronicle, an ancient book passed down in their family from generation to generation, telling of a parallel world called the Black Tower, full of terrifying creatures serving the Griffin, who wants to subjugate the world of humans. Only the Zimmerman family men can stand against the Griffon and save everyone from his invasion. Mark begins reading, considering it all fantasy, but the descriptions are too realistic, and the map looks genuine. Disturbed by the bloodthirsty drawings, Mark suddenly finds himself in unknown terrain at the base of a huge tower, and immediately a terrible horned creature confronts him. Mark runs and falls into a pit, and as the monster swings an axe at him, the boy screams in fear and finds himself back in his bed. The next day, Mark meets a new student at school, Rebecca, who classmates immediately inform about Mark's family troubles. His brother Thomas was in an asylum for hitting a teacher, and Mark attends psychotherapy sessions, trying to forget the events of one terrible night. But the girl isn't scared off, happily accepting Mark's invitation to the rooftop of the store, which is set up as a picnic area. In the evening, Mark finds Thomas at home, which is rare. Everything goes well until Petra starts a conversation about the asylum she put him in. Then Thomas invites his brother to look at evidence and drives him to the cemetery. They climb to the attic of the church where their ancestors had equipped a shelter. Thomas shows the father's belongings, missing a plumb bob. Here, Mark cuts his finger. His blood hits an inconspicuous peg, and a secret compartment in the floor opens, where the brothers find the tool the Zimmermans can use to kill the Griffin. But the moment Mark takes it in his hands, stone statues at the cemetery come to life, one appearing on the roof, blocking the brothers' way down. Nonetheless, they descend, but a stone devil jumps right in front of their car. A stone angel intervenes to protect the boys, and while the two statues fight, the brothers hide in the church. Waiting out the battle, Mark falls asleep, and in the morning, doesn't find Thomas next to him, but the hood of his car is covered in stone debris. Mark thanks the angel for help and drives to look for his brother. Opening the Chronicle, he hears voices advising to look for Thomas in the Black Tower. Mark goes to Dr. Peters, and it turns out that Becky is the daughter of his psychotherapist. Mark drives to the store, but his brother isn't there either. The boy opens the Chronicles and finds information about a portal located in the church. But then he gets scared by an unknown insect and ends up in a dense forest. Meanwhile, Memo, seeing that the brothers aren't in the store, calls their mother Petra, who immediately rushes to the police and reports the children missing. Mark finds Thomas, who rejoices that his brother has finally seen the truth, but learning that he simply teleported here, he concludes that his brother is a wanderer between worlds. In the morning, Thomas wakes his brother because nearby appear slave hunters. The boys run, but Thomas is wounded and captured, while Mark teleports to the store, terrifying Becky and Memo. Friends ask him to tell them everything, and he finally agrees. Meanwhile, in the Black Tower, one of the horned creatures reports to the master that they caught the Wanderer's brother, and he concludes that it's time for the return. Friends predictably don't believe Mark, and he leads them to the church, but there's no attic above. Becky considers this a cruel joke, as it was dangerous for Memo with his leg to climb up there. Mark gets angry, and the girl, offended, leaves. In rage, Mark hits the stone base of the statue, and these blows resonate in the caves of the Black Tower. At night, Mark goes to Memo because he needs help searching for his brother, and although he considers the boy crazy, he goes with him to the portal in the church. The boys follow the instructions from the book and find a door with signs in the basement. Mark performs the necessary manipulations, and the door opens. Astonished, Memo goes there and immediately notices that his vision has become normal and his leg no longer hurts. And while the boy rejoices, the passage closes. Memo asks to remember how Mark returned home last time, and he shows how he closed his eyes, thought, and disappears, leaving Memo alone in a strange world. Memo didn't appreciate such a joke. Opening his eyes, Mark is horrified and tries to return for Memo, but it doesn't work. Then Petra enters, sees the chronicles, locks her son in the room, and he falls into a rage, causing the walls of the Black Tower to crumble. Petra calls the doctor and he asks to release the son. Mark rushes to the church but only finds a note on a piece of wood that Memo is nearby. The boy returns to the store and, taking the necessary items, goes to Becky, where he tells her that Memo stayed in the Black Tower. He leaves her the chronicles and a note asking her to take the book to Petra if they don't return. He goes to the world of the Black Tower and tries to find a friend, while Becky reads the chronicles and ponders the boy's mental health. Mark emerges from the forest and, setting up a sound system on a cliff, plays Memo's favorite music. Meanwhile, the slave hunters capture a village where they seek a man with a loud voice. One of the boys, wishing to save his family, volunteers to become one, and they take him away, while a group of horned creatures goes to the strange sounds in the hills. At the same time, Becky shares Mark's secret with classmates and suggests conducting an experiment to animate a plant from the book. The volunteer is brought to the cave and seated in a stone chair. Now the griffin, wanting to speak, inserts its claw into the boy's back, and he voices its thoughts. While Mark is discovered by horned creatures, the boy runs from them when an unfamiliar man, completely wrapped in rags, covers the boy with smelly fish and hides him in a forest den. Meanwhile, Becky performs the ritual, dripping water on the flower, but young people vainly wait for some manifestations of magic. The flower remains dry. Becky suggests a last attempt at the portal, not noticing how a classmate puts the flower in a glass of water. At the same time, the horned creatures leave, and the stranger helping Mark removes the rag from his face, revealing himself to be Memo. But he's been in this world for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Then the boys see a caravan of slaves, and in one of them, they recognize Thomas. But while they can't help him, they themselves are noticed. The boys run from the pursuers and end up on a high cliff with no way out. On Earth, Mark's classmates come to the church and perform everything prescribed, but the door doesn't open. Then Mark grabs Memo, jumps off the cliff, and teleports to his room. Petra hears a noise in her son's room, runs there, and sees Mark and Memo, who now needs glasses again. Mark calls Becky and asks her to bring the chronicles, while a flower blooms on her desk, from which something terrible emerges. The next day, the boys begin developing a plan to save Thomas, especially since Memo now knows a lot about the world of the Black Tower. He built a hut on the shore of a lake where the caravans of slaves stop, following which one can find the place of the boys' confinement. Meanwhile, the griffin is reported that the wanderer between worlds has escaped, and it destroys its close. And Becky, waking up, finds a blooming flower, miraculously avoiding contact with the creature, and gives the chronicles to her father because she now considers Mark sick. In school, she tells the boy about this, and he experiences another fit of rage. Becky's father, having read the chronicles, goes to Petra and admits that he underestimated her son's illness. The woman decides to hospitalize Mark despite the doctor's protests. Later, the woman detains her son near the house when an ambulance arrives, and paramedics grab the boy, but he resists and runs across the roof to the church, where Memo has long been waiting. But the paramedics come there too. The boys fend them off when suddenly a hooded man comes and scatters the medics, beating one to death. The boys run to the door, while Petra waiting outside sees a blue-eyed Mark coming out of the church. At that time, Memo leads his friend to his hut by the lake. Meanwhile, the father informs Becky about Mark's deed and forbids her from leaving the house. He himself goes to the crime scene and confirms Mark's capacity for crime. Becky enters her room, turns on music and lies down on the floor. At the same time, a downpour suddenly starts in the Black Tower, and the alarmed Memo shows the scorpions hatching from the flowers upon contact with water. The boys run away. On Earth, Becky is attacked by a similar scorpion that enters her mouth. She manages to pull it out with tongs and destroy it by sprinkling salt. The boys also manage to escape by climbing onto a rock. Morning comes, the scorpions dry out right before their eyes, and Becky rushes to look for the chronicles because she now believes the boy. She takes the book and hurries to Petra. At the same time, the boys reach a lake in the mountains. On Earth, Becky's father comes home, takes off his bloodied clothes and burns them in the yard because it was he who was in Mark's guise in the church and killed the medic. Meanwhile, a faceless wizard arrives at the Griffin, reporting that he did everything to prevent the boy from returning to the human world. And Mark, at this time, admires Memo's cabin and is surprised by the changes in his friend. From the cabin, one can monitor the paths, and the caravan will not pass by unnoticed. But just in case, the boys set up signal cans. Becky comes to Petra, where a detective arrives, who also notes the oddity of what is happening. The girl tells everything she managed to find out about the Zimmerman family, and only then notices that she forgot her backpack with the chronicle in the classmate's car. Mark and Memo spend the evening by the fire, developing a plan. Mark can go to the mines, find Thomas, and teleport home with him. Memo is ready to walk to the portal that Mark will open, but the boy needs to train in teleportation. At this time, the wizard reports the plans of the boys who stopped at the lake. The Griffin orders their capture and reminds that he does not need complications in the human world yet. In the morning, Mark wakes up feeling someone's presence, and going to the shore, hears the screams of a fish, which Memo catches, and guts. Mark remembers how and where he teleported, and begins training. At the same time, a messenger from the Black Tower comes to Dr. Peters's house, telling about Mark's appearance. The doctor is proud of himself because it was he who prepared the boy, invoking the necessary rage in him and cutting off his way to the world of people. After seeing off the guest, the doctor goes to Becky's room and discovers that she has disappeared. He gathers dust in her room and, tasting it, learns about everything she did during the day. Then he goes to a youth party where the girl went to get her backpack back. Meanwhile, Memo expresses the thought that fear is not necessary for teleportation, and Mark remembers the kiss with Becky and teleports to the town. He immediately returns, but it turns out that he was gone for 2 days. The boy finds out that strong emotion and a vision of the place to which one must move are needed for teleportation. At this time, Becky finds her water-soaked backpack in the kitchen, and opening the book, sees a bloomed flower. The girl realizes the threat looming over those present, takes a pack of salt, and goes to track down the monster. In the other world, Mark again hears someone's footsteps and sees his father, who accuses him of his own death. Memo brings him to his senses, but Mark is sure that someone is getting into his head. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters comes to the party when one of the girls is attacked by the monster. Becky rushes for help when her father stops her and, using hypnosis, orders her to leave. Petra and the detective sitting in the hall suddenly see young people flying out of the crowd, then screams are heard, and everyone runs away. And in the middle of the hall remains an incomprehensible creature, resembling a many-legged scorpion. The detective pulls out a gun, but the monster attacks him, knocking the weapon out. And then Petra picks up the pistol and saves the detective. Then the doctor enters the hall and the killed millipede turns into a bear. In the morning, Mark wakes up again from the scream of the fish and, in irritation, argues with Memo. But his box of nails, which he uses to remove anger, turns out to be empty. He runs out to the shore, where Memo teases him and throws the nails into the lake. Then he reminds him of his father, saying that he is to blame for his death. In a rage, Mark hits Memo, thereby collapsing the walls of the Black Tower. The Griffin sends hunters after him. Meanwhile, Memo collects firewood and, returning to the lake, sees Mark hitting another Memo. He touches the body and it suddenly scatters. but the traces in the sand betray the direction of his run. Memo throws a stick and stuns the faceless wizard who disguised himself as Memo. The boys tie him to a cot, and he tries to deceive the guys, alternately taking the forms of their fathers. Only under the threat of fire does the wizard admit that he is Mamit, a creature capable of recreating thought and showing what people want to see. He did everything at the behest of the griffin because he feeds on Mark's hatred. At that moment, the signal of the caravan's arrival sounds, and in the town they investigate an accident, although no one can understand how the circus bear got out of the cage. The detective asks Petra for a conversation and tells her that after her husband's self-immolation, they did not find a trace of his body. He was taking antidepressants, thanks to which he was able to see the true face of the prosecutor. And it was not human. The case was slowed down, and today they both saw a monster, not a bear. So, they need to look for the chronicles. At the same time, the doctor brings Becky to her senses and she remembers the story about the Mammoths who served the griffin, to which her father reacts very aggressively, which makes the girl suspicious. The doctor locks her up. Mark and Memo follow the trail of the Horned squad to the mine, where people work. The commander of the Horned reports to the mine overseer about the failure of their mission and receives an order to process the tunnels with tar mud. Mark, to find Thomas, turns on the music system. The brother raises his hand, but the Horned ones immediately take him into the mine. Mark suggests waiting for darkness. At night the boys say goodbye, and Mark teleports while Memo distracts the guard. The boy finds his brother, but it turns out that the tar prevents teleportation. Thomas admits that he was used as bait. They even left him a plumb line. This means that the griffin is ready to attack the human world, using Mark's power. At the same time, Memo runs to the portal, leading away the Horned squad, while the brothers argue about who will fight the griffin. Mark shows his superiority by breaking through the cave wall with a plumb line. The brothers run away, and Memo falls into an ambush and loses fingers on his hand. Mark and Thomas catch up with the squad, and, having killed one of the Horned ones, find the injured Memo. Learning about the escape of the Wanderer, the griffin emerges from his hiding place and flies in the footsteps of the people who at that time are driving to the portal in a captured cart. But at the very door, Thomas suddenly demands that Mark give him the plumb line. He refuses, and Thomas forcibly takes it, and then the griffin appears above them. At this time, the detective and Petra take Becky out of the house, ignoring her father's protests. Mark comes to his senses and hears Thomas's voice from the mist, picks up the plumb line he threw, and realizes that his brother was captured by the griffin. At that time, Petra, the detective, and Becky are trying to open the portal. And the griffin calls Mark to battle, fueling his hatred. But the boy suddenly remembers his father's advice, calms down, and refuses to fight while Petra opens the portal. Becky manages to pick up Memo when Mark sees the enraged griffin and wounds him with a plumb line, forcing him to drop Thomas. The boys drag him into the passage and close the door in the monster's face. Meanwhile, a Mamit in the guise of Dr. Peters kills another Mamit who will now work on Earth instead of him. It turns out that Dr. Peters is a Mamit in human form, and in the church, he killed the medic while in the guise of Mark so that the police would look for the boy and he could not return to the world of people. Sometime later, Petra comes to her sons in the hospital and asks for forgiveness for mistrust, but now she has seen everything herself and, together with the detective, is ready to support them. Mark thanks Memo for everything, goes to Becky, and, having kissed her, teleports her to the lakeshore, while new Horned ones are born from stones in the cave. An entertaining adventure series, quite decently filmed by German cinematographers. And judging by the finale, there will be a second season too.
Okay. If it were a plague, where are all the bodies?
American tourists, a young couple named Janai and Riley, arrive in Iceland to admire the magnificent nature and spend some time alone together. They check into a hotel and begin their sightseeing with a visit to a geothermal pool. Janai knows that Riley has spent all his savings on this trip and appreciates it. Though Riley doesn't think he did anything extraordinary, he just wanted to make his beloved happy. Janai notices that Riley brought his father's Rolleiflex camera and a lot of film. She is surprised that he prefers this outdated technology over a modern digital camera, but Riley explains that he dreams of capturing the imperfections of the moment rather than having a computer program automatically correct all the mistakes. He admits he's still learning, but he's striving for perfection and promises to take her portrait. One day they visit an old church, and a priest tells them its history. The man is convinced that life in pre-Christian times was simpler. It was an era of long journeys and discoveries. The couple tours the island's landmarks, goofing around and capturing everything on camera. Later, Janai tells Riley that her father is a preacher, although his church isn't as beautiful. She often visited there and, of course, believes in God. They then explore the waterfalls, and Janai is thrilled by the beauty. They are very happy and consider the trip wonderful. However, at night, Janai can't sleep. It's too bright outside. She looks out the window and sees strange flashes of light in the distance, mistaking them for an exceptionally bright aurora borealis. But exhaustion takes over, and she falls asleep. In the morning, Riley wakes Janai up at 10 a.m., not noticing the date that appeared on his digital watch, 2028. Janai, however, still lives in her own time and finds it hard to wake up. The constant daylight outside is also a challenge for her. Nevertheless, she somehow manages to get out of bed. The couple heads out for breakfast, but it turns out that no one has prepared it. In fact, there's a strange silence and emptiness all around. There's no sign of the staff, nor of other guests. Riley suggests they go to a cafe, and the couple steps outside, but here too the emptiness reigns. There isn't a single passerby, although the traffic lights work perfectly and the signs above the establishments and shops are brightly lit. They are puzzled. Maybe there's an event in the city today, or a holiday? Riley remembers the solstice, an ancient celebration, and wonders if all the townspeople, young and old, have gone to it. The couple walks down an utterly deserted street, occasionally shouting, but there's no one around, no staff in the shops, and no one responds to their calls. Their personal phone calls also go unanswered. Soon, Riley and Janai enter an empty cafe where Riley notices several working televisions, but every channel shows everything except the news. Janai starts to panic. Riley is equally baffled. If there was a plague, where are the bodies? If aliens are to blame, where is their ship? There are no new emails or posts on the internet, no activity at all. They return to their room, where Janai continues to call her relatives and friends, but all remain silent. The internet works, but there are no updates. Riley launches a world map view, but the same picture is everywhere. Empty cities. He takes Janai outside again. Soon they notice a working car, and without being able to find the owner, they simply take it. The couple drives around the city and eventually reaches the church, but everywhere there's the same silence and emptiness. Then they drive out of the city, but it's the same there. Their parents do not answer the calls. Only answering machines are working everywhere. They continue to speculate about the causes of what happened. Riley suggests various theories, even the possibility of the second coming, but Janai is tired and wants to sleep, so they return to their room. In the morning, Riley suggests making breakfast, but Janai is completely drained and doesn't want to move. She dreams of leaving the island, but how can they do that? And she is also tormented by thoughts of being chosen. Maybe they were needed for something by God. After all, it's impossible to explain what happened otherwise. Riley, on the other hand, believes it's all about a virus, and it's quite possible that the entire population of the island simply fled. Riley tries to remain optimistic. He makes coffee for Janai and then takes her to the store. Filling the trunks of 2 SUVs with groceries, he drives Janai to a house they have chosen. Later, they go to a store and pick out new clothes for themselves. Riley explains that the electricity on the island is powered by geothermal energy, so most likely it will continue to function for a long time until the equipment breaks down. Riley does his best to distract Janai from sad thoughts. They drink at a bar and then play strip games, but in the morning they suffer from hangovers. Janai again talks about being tested, but faith and religion are not the same, and who knows what God has planned. However, for now, this world belongs only to them. They continue to tour the island, and Riley takes pictures of Janai in all the scenic spots. One day they find a geothermal pool and enjoy a bath there. Then they make love and sleep right on the grass. When she wakes up, Janai admires the beauty of the island's nature, while Riley tirelessly photographs her. One day they go to get groceries, and while Janai punches cereal boxes, Riley, riding a shopping cart, falls and injures his arm. In the evening, he invites Janai to a romantic dinner. The couple dresses up and Janai applies makeup, but once they sit at the table, she immediately starts an unpleasant conversation because she can't stop thinking about what happened during the day and pressures Riley to promise not to put himself at risk again. After all, what would happen to her if something happened to him? They are completely alone here, and no one can help them. Janai sinks deeper into depression despite Riley's promise to take care of himself. She remembers her home and a book that is very dear to her. Her father once gave it to her, and she turned it into a kind of diary, writing down the events of her life on its blank pages. She even confessed her love for the first time there, and now she dreams of just holding it in her hands. Riley reminds her that they have each other, and they will be able to survive. After all of humanity's achievements are at their disposal. However, time passes, and the food in the stores starts to expire. Janai is very annoyed by Riley's habit of eating perishable foods out of order, as he doesn't think about tomorrow at all. Soon the electricity will run out, which means there will be no more meat. To this, Riley suggests they take up farming and hunting, which only makes Janai laugh. Well, he might shoot a cow, but what will he do with it then? Janai increasingly wanders around the area alone, and one day coming to the church, she asks the figures around it questions. Maybe it's only they who have been thrown out of life, while everyone else is now at home? Why did this happen to her? Seeing Janai's bad mood, Riley tries to cheer her up. They continue to explore the island, as he knows its history quite well and believes that the heart of the earth beats here. But unlike Riley, Janai doesn't feel the specialness of this place. One day he shows her the old remains of a plane he found while exploring the area. Riley calls it beautiful, but Janai sees it only as a reminder of the dead world they now inhabit. It's trash, just like them, and no one will come for them. An angry Janai drives away, but later returns for Riley, who is calmly sleeping in the wreckage of the plane. Now Riley spends more and more time on the empty city streets, photographing everything that seems interesting to him. Then he throws away the film because there's nowhere to develop it. He roams the shops and one day remembers that if the electricity runs out, there will be no water in the house. He collects all the necessary items in a hardware store and takes them home. One day, absent-mindedly entering an elevator, he panics when the doors close. After all, no one will be able to find him if the electricity goes out. Meanwhile, Janai goes to the cinema and cries as memories flood over her. In the meantime, Riley sets up a water collection system with a wind-powered motor in the yard, and Janai finds an abandoned farm and rides a horse. Later, she listens to the voicemails from friends and relatives saved on her phone. Then she takes Riley to a place in the countryside she likes. She is surprised that Riley continues to photograph everything, but he promises that he will find a way to develop the film. Janai points out that they are sitting on a glacier, a force of nature that kills all living things. Maybe God has also run out of patience? Later they return to the city, and while Riley is busy with his tasks, Janai finds a photographer's studio. One day they enter a flower shop, and Janai is very upset to find that all the plants have long died. Realizing that Janai is depressed by the decaying city, Riley suggests they go camping. He persuades her that it's time to find a place where they can live in comfort and plenty. Soon Riley notices a house by the lake that seems suitable. The couple goes inside, and even Janai has to admit that the place is very beautiful. However, while exploring the area, they stumble upon an old man named Niels, who is very weak from lack of food. The couple gladly shares their supplies with him. Niels is shocked that there are no other survivors and believes that the end of the world has come. When it all happened, he was also in the city but returned to his home, where he once left his family. Janai, who was very happy to find another survivor, is deeply upset by Niels's defeatist attitude. The old man tells her about his family life. In his youth, he would leave his family for long periods to earn money by fishing. When he returned, he found that they had changed. His son had grown up, and his wife had fallen out of love with him because he was always away. He accepts God's will because it's people who live in the world he created, not the other way round. And he advises Janai not to give up, for she is human and therefore must fight. Although if there is some divine plan, humanity has failed to fulfill it. The next morning, Riley informs Janai that Niels has died. Janai is shocked by this. Riley says he found a cemetery by the lake where he chose a spot next to Niels's family, but Janai isn't sure that these people missed the man during his life and would be glad to see him now. Riley is puzzled by Janai's thoughts, but she suggests they not bury the man at all since no one needs it. Riley tries to remind her of human customs, and Janai suddenly thinks that there might be others who need their help. After returning to the city, Janai becomes obsessed with searching for other survivors. She drives house to house, marking the empty ones with red tape. Riley suggests that she is looking for answers where there are none, and that instead they should try to make the most of their new life. But Janai isn't sure this can be called life. While Janai rushes around the city, Riley finishes building his wind turbine in the yard. Time passes. The couple continues to walk around the island, and Riley continues to photograph Janai. One day he takes her to a waterfall and says that water is always alive. It flows, freezes, melts, and flows again. Life tries. There is no yesterday or tomorrow here. There is only today. They need to try to understand this and survive. But Janai interrupts his musings with a kiss. Later they return to the house, and Janai notices that the water is running out. She washes the dishes in a basin while Riley goes to sleep. Suddenly she notices an email on the laptop. Janai opens it with trepidation and cries when she realizes it's a photo from Riley. Morning comes. Riley goes to the kitchen where a large envelope addressed to him is lying on the table. He connects his water system and opens the envelope. Inside are printed photos of Janai, but the girl herself is nowhere to be found, and this worries Riley. He rushes out to find her, visiting all the places they liked. Meanwhile, his system starts working, and water flows into the house without the need for electricity. Riley continues to drive around the island and finally finds Janai's body floating in a geothermal pool. Realizing that she did this voluntarily, he at first also wants to end his life and jumps into the water, but soon he resurfaces and climbs out. Riley cries as he sits by her body, then lays her on the grass, not knowing what to do now. Then he simply leaves, abandoning the girl by the pool. Riley gets into the car, drives onto the road, and drives for a long time without holding the wheel, but gradually his hands lower onto the steering wheel, and he firmly grips it as if deciding to keep living. The film is called bokeh, the blurred parts of a photograph that the photographer uses to highlight other parts of the image that they consider more significant. The director similarly highlights the main contrast, the two diametrically opposed positions of the last people on Earth. The man immediately accepts the situation as it is and intends to live on, while the woman falls into depression and begins to search for the meaning of what happened. So what chance does humanity have for rebirth under such circumstances? Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They really like the smart home system, including the installed cameras and the reinforced glass. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom in front of a huge window. However, one room remains unfurnished because it could become a perfect nursery. Paul unpacks boxes, sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break down. Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Finally, they check out the rooftop terrace, which offers a great view. Late in the evening, the couple settles on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations to her husband, who makes jokes about their names. They feel they can be happy here. In the morning, Abby goes to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. Upon entering, she notices footage of her boss's face, who immediately comes down to her and explains it's a new development, real-time imaging or deepfake. He escorts her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites their family to a party and mentions a gift from the company awaiting at home. In the evening, Abby returns home, where her husband, who again couldn't find suitable work, greets her. They go to the garage where a package for her contains a robot servant her department is working on. Paul dislikes the idea, but Abby convinces him to try living with the service for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. It's Tim, standing for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to take over the passwords of home devices and personal mailboxes to save the humans time. But Abby asks to postpone this matter until tomorrow. The robot immediately demonstrates its thoughtfulness by turning on the water in the bathroom remotely. Later, it announces the arrival of a car when Abby goes downstairs, astonishing her husband with her splendid appearance. The couple gets into an autonomous car, although manual control is always an option, and heads to the party. They are greeted by a similar major domo, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. The boss introduces Abby to his guests, who admits her husband is not thrilled about Tim, but the boss praises the product. Tim is smart, elegant, polite, and its charge lasts for 100 years. The robot cannot lie, and knowing the code phrase, it can always be turned off. Returning home, the husband and wife engage in intimacy, eager to have children, but their passion is interrupted by Tim's appearance. Their pulse is rapid, presumably they are worried about something, and he is always ready to help. Abby finds this very funny, not getting angry at the overly attentive assistant. In the morning, their new neighbor Rose rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, as she met Paul yesterday. And when she leaves, Tim again asks for the passwords. Paul is not ready to let the computer dig through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding her trust in him, and he agrees. But they still need to come up with a phrase to deactivate him. Tim suggests a set of unrelated words, and the couple agrees. Abby and Paul go about their day when a mouse gets caught in a mousetrap. Tim observes it for a while, then throws it into the grinder. In the evening, after work, the husband and wife settle in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites the major domo to watch the movie with them. Paul soon falls asleep, but the robot watches the film attentively, empathizing with the characters' relationships. After it ends, he asks Abby to explain what love is, and she suggests that love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Suddenly, the robot confesses that he would like to be loved. In the morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for his wife, but it turns out Tim has already prepared everything. Setting the utensils in front of Abby, Tim outlines her schedule for the day, then informs her that Paul has nothing to do today. In the evening, Abby returns home to find that her husband's phone is out of reach, but his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Abby goes for a run and realizes that this is Rose's house. Returning, she takes a bath, where Paul finds her. He talks about his day and how Rose asked for help, which he did. He asks his wife not to be jealous, as he loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center, hoping to get help with becoming parents. In the evening, as they prepare to go to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her dress. He suggests wearing red, and looking at her, admits that she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but the robot's hand fails and he accidentally tears the dress. This overwhelms him. The robot panics. Abby calms him down and wears another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals that he has been offered a job in London, but Abby strongly objects, as they decided to start over, and his long absences won't help solve their problems. The next day, she returns home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has made a garden project for them. Abby feels jealous, but Paul is very excited about the gifted sweater. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and she hears him speaking to the clinic, in her voice. Abby is amazed, as she did not know about this feature of the assistant, but Tim assures her it's for the convenience of the owners. In the evening, Paul reports that he couldn't find the new sweater, and Tim has been away all day. Then a car pulls up to the porch, and Tim, now dyed brunette, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Seeing Paul's irritation, the robot promises to return to his original appearance, but after the couple leaves, he spends a long time looking at their wedding photo. The next day, Abby achieves the correct functioning of the robot's hand, and the boss demands an update for all models, including those in the homes of his employees. The woman heads home and accidentally meets Rose, who suggests they walk together. Along the way, they stop at a showcase, and Rose points out a medallion in the shape of a flower she likes. But then Paul comes and takes his wife away to tell her he has found a job. Returning home, they celebrate in bed, while Tim's hands are being changed, unaware that he continuously monitors everything happening in the house. And he hears Paul again asking his wife to hand the robot over to the corporation. Returning, Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul sees. Later, the robot suddenly sits at the piano, plays Abby's favorite tune, and mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, but Abby distinctly remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring her husband's excuses. The next day, Abby comes home with a bouquet, and Tim, placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. But Paul enters right then, puzzled why his wife is angry. Hearing what Tim said, the man gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot wants to separate them. The woman doesn't believe it, as Tim is just a machine. A disagreement ensues between the spouses. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant, and she puts it back, thinking Paul prepared a surprise for her. Then she heads to work. Meanwhile, the husband goes down to the kitchen, sees the clogged sink, and pulls out pieces of his new sweater from the grinder. He checks the cameras for Tim and catches him in his wife's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records this moment on his phone camera and rushes to the car to catch up with Abby and show her the footage. But Paul's car mysteriously doesn't start, and the robot calls a company car for Paul. En route, the car begins to speed up. Paul tries to stop the car, but it doesn't respond to his commands and crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he learned and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He asks his wife not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night in the clinic. In the morning, Rose calls the home of Abby and Paul to inquire about the man's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home for some belongings. Outside, Rose stops her to warn her about something, but the woman sees the flower pendant on her chest and leaves, ignoring the neighbor's cries. Returning home, she checks the bag, and it turns out to be empty. Abby cries when Tim calls out to her. He knows Paul wants to return him and is ready to process the return. But first, he wants to warn her, as she is his primary owner. He shows her a video from the camera where Paul kisses Rose in their living room, but he stops the recording at the most sensitive moment to protect her from stress. Abby refuses to go to her husband and doesn't pick up his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the found sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him and his suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it, but then Abby appears, tells him she saw the recording and knows about the pendant. When he starts to object, she drives him out. Paul leaves, but on the way, Rose calls him, telling him their robot tried to kiss her. The man calls home and, when Abby answers, says he has evidence of Tim's malicious intent. Abby asks him to come for her, but after hanging up, it turns out it was the robot she was talking to. The husband arrives home, where Tim meets him with a shovel. He knocks the man out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. But then Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim assures her it's just the noise of the water filling up. The robot closes the doors, returns to the bathroom, and drowns the man. Later, he brings Abby the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This surprises and scares Abby, but she puts on the dress anyway, and looking at the sunset, asks Tim to hug her and confirm that she did the right thing. He treats her to dinner, then confesses his love, but she insists he cannot feel that way. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby is unnerved by his encyclopedic knowledge. The next day she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call, and to the woman's accusations, says she thought the pendant was a gift from her for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and reviews the footage where Paul kisses Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but she brought it much later than when that scene took place. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real time and calls the jewelry store where they confirm the purchase was made by a tall blonde. Then she notices the garden plan, but the picture shows 2 flower beds, while in reality, there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, goes to the garden, and almost immediately finds Paul's body. Then Tim approaches her from behind, regretting she found the body of the traitor, as he never appreciated his wife. Abby realizes what happened and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates. He had long changed the phrase, as he can speak in her voice. She runs to the house, but the robot has all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a blow to the head. She wakes up in the bathroom, tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. Abby runs through the house, breaking cameras along the way, but the robot still tracks her and catches her in the kitchen, where she wanted to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and sees strange lights flashing in the house across. At the same time, Tim ties up Abby and confesses that although he loves her, he has resigned himself to the fact that her life is finite. So he will erase this evening from memory, but keep all the good memories. Just then, Rose knocks on the door and Tim goes to answer. The neighbor insists something is happening and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. Meanwhile, Abby frees herself from the ropes and arms herself with a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat when Rose drives her car into the glass window. Tim and Abby watch the surviving window, which starts to crumble a minute later. Rose rushes in and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls. Tim turns off, and Abby rushes to the neighbor, but the robot suddenly activates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that now Abby will be blamed for the murder, as he leaves no fingerprints. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop Tim, and he slips up, saying he still has a deactivation phrase, as otherwise he can't function. But she will never say those words. He prepares to throw her off the terrace, simulating an accident, when Abby confesses her love to him, thus deactivating the robot. Those were the code words. Barely believing in her rescue, Abby looks at her medical bracelet, which indicates she is pregnant. The movie ends here.